Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing today? We can start with any questions that you might have from yesterday's session about HTML before we jump into CSS today. Okay.
I missed yesterday's lecture because I was working, so I'm kind of coming to where you're at right now. I'm a little bit familiar with HTML. I think I'll be
Okay.
able to pick up where you left off at and continue to CSS.
Okay.
But
Sounds good.
no questions yet. Let's see how it goes. I'm just interested in to see how it goes today.
No problem. And if you have any question as we move into today's lecture or today's session, feel free to stop me and ask any question that you might have.
Okay.
Okay. Also, I'll keep my eye on the chat. If you have any question, you can drop the questions on the chat. Um, Let me start by sharing my screen. So again, yesterday we covered a lot of HTML tags. That's not all of them, of course. We're missing a lot, like the forms, like input buttons, and how to create forms. But we covered a good amount of HTML. Given that this is a mini bootcamp, we can't cover everything about HTML and CSS in just 4 days. Okay, CSS. We're gonna first go over an introduction to CSS. We're gonna go over what is CSS and how you're probably gonna use it in HTML, the history of CSS, and it's evolving very fast. And they even added a lot of feature recently to CSS that you need to do a lot of JavaScript coding previously to have this feature, but now they are built in CSS. So we're going to go over the CSS syntax and how to understand syntax and all the properties. Again, we're not going to be covering all the properties because there are a lot of CSS properties, but we're going to cover that 90% popular that any developer have to use in a day-to-day tasks. First, we're going to go over what is CSS. CSS, it's an abbreviation for cascading style sheet. And later on, we're going to understand why the word cascading. But at the end of the day, it's just a style sheet, a style that you're trying to style something. In that case, you're styling your HTML document, and it's a sheet. Okay. And extension for any CSS file is going to be .css. It is a markup language that determines the style properties. So you list the properties of an HTML element. Thanks to CSS, the properties of many elements can be changed at the same time with a single definition. While defining the skeleton and the content of the page with HTML, so you just make the structure with a regular HTML or the HTML code. However, you can format it with the CSS. That's how you style the document, how you make it a pretty website by using CSS. Again, it is short for cascading style sheets. As we mentioned yesterday, the HTML is just the skeleton of your document. If you want to add a presentation layer to it or care about the appearance of your web page, then in that case, you should, that's the job for the CSS. And finally, if you want to make your web page or website interactive, then you should add JavaScript. So for example, when the user click on a button or submit a form or hover over certain fields, you want to do something that will make your application interactive. So the HTML is the content and the structure. CSS is more about presentation of your web page. JavaScript, it's all about the logic, data, and the behavior of your web page. So CSS is the presentation layer. Think about it as 3 layers. The foundation is the HTML. Then you add another layer, which is the CSS, to make it pretty web page. And to make it interactive, you add the third layer, which is the JavaScript. And that's the basic of any web application. At the end of the day, that's the three things that the browser can understand. It understands HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Don't understand anything else. That's the three layers that any web browser can understand. Let's talk a little bit about the history for the CSS. It goes back all the way to 1990. Then in 1994, CSS was first proposed. And usually it's a specification. So you say, for example, the whole thing that you want to create a standard that different vendors, when I mean vendors, that mean different browsers like Chrome, because Chrome is made by Google, Microsoft Edge or Internet Explorer, it's made by Microsoft. That's a different vendor. And you have the Firefox, that's a different vendor. So you're creating a standard that all these vendors can follow or can apply when they present HTML documents. So it was first proposed back in 1994. In 1996, they put CSS1 recommendations. In 1998, it's always recommendations for the standard. They proposed CSS2. Fast forward all the way to 2004, they have something called 2.1. And CSS3 is the latest version of CSS where they created modular CSS. What I mean by modular, they added multiple modules. So you have the text properties, you have the grid properties, you have, so they separated per modules. That started from the CSS3, and they introduced back in 2011 the CSS3 selectors, where the selectors became very flexible. Okay, back in 2017, they introduced the Flexbox Level 1 candidate recommendation and the CSS3 UI in 2017. And I can tell you that Flexbox and the grid layout in CSS, it's a new addition for the CSS3. And it's a game changer, especially if you trying to lay out a web page. Before Flexbox, it was really hard. You find developers use tables or using floating the elements, and there's a lot of pros and cons, and it wasn't easy to lay out your page using CSS until Flexbox was introduced. And Flexbox help you to lay out your application either in a columns or in a row. So technically in 2-dimension, you can create beautiful layouts for your application. And the grid system, it's columns and rows at the same time. So you don't have to use tables anymore. Again, if you do a little search, like Chrome, CSS3, let's say 2023, 2023 new features. And I would like to go to documentation that they make a lot of update in every single year, but they still belong to CSS3. So let's see if this page, you see here, that's all the updates that was made in 2023. They added some color mix nesting. Has was a new addition. It's a selector, but you want to keep up to date with all these features that added, because it will make your life easy when you use this type of features. You don't have to use JavaScript and all of that. CSS become very, very mature, and they have a lot of, like, for example, the nth child, we're going to explain that later. They introduced the off syntax, where the second of dot special, and we're going to go over what does that mean. But as you can see, all of these features are recently added last year, and it's belonged to CSS 3 because it's become a modular design. Okay, it's always, you want to do this, your research to find all the new features, because this will make your development process much easier. Okay, probably gonna see a couple of these new features. Let me see the pop over. So they're adding a new API, they call it pop over API, and that's to have like a module on top of it. That's real nice, because to do something like this previously, you needed like a frameworks for CSS like Bootstrap. However, now as long as it's embedded with CSS, that's great. Perfect. I probably need to take a look at the new added feature in the CSS. But again, you can do a lot with the existing feature that we're going to cover in the class. First step is to take a look at the syntax to understand how you can use CSS in your code or in your HTML document. In CSS, you need to declare your properties. The first and the most important one is the selection or the selector. In that case, I'm selecting all heading level 1 in my document, not only the first one, not only the second one, but all of them. I'm selecting all of them, so the selector. Now I selected the element. What should I do? You open a parenthesis and you close a parenthesis, and between the two parentheses, you start adding CSS properties declarations. You can add as many as properties you want. All these properties follow a certain format. They must have a key, value, and they are separated by a colon. Make sure that the value, you don't wrap it with a single quotation or anything. You just put the value right away, and you terminate it with a semicolon. It's very important to terminate it with a semicolon, so it will understand that this line finished right here, and now we're gonna read the second line. So the semicolon, you can think about it as termination of the property. So this is a declaration, property declaration, that have a property name. In that case, I want to change the color property of the H1. I want to change the color property, and I want to make it blue. The value will be blue. I want to here, for example, I have another declaration, and I can add as many as declaration that I want. I want the text align property that means you want to align the text of the H1 to be, in that case, in the center. That will make it in the center of the screen. So it's a property and value. Also, you can think about it as a key and value. So the declaration is a key and value pair of CSS property and its value. Each declaration includes a CSS property name and a value. They must be separated with a semicolon, not a colon. Colon is like this, semicolon is like this. I think this is type. Okay. Let's take an example. Let's do it together. Let me create a new folder here. I'm going to call it CSS1. Open it with Visual Studio Code. And I have my Visual Studio Code here. And I can create a new document. I'm going to call it index.html. And I'm going to create a boilerplate for my HTML. And you can do that easily with Visual Studio Code by pressing the exclamation mark and press Tab or Enter. That will give you a boilerplate of an HTML document. You have the doc type, the HTML tags, the head, and the body. I'll change the title here. And I can say CSS syntax. Okay. So I can have here an H1, say CSS syntax. To start adding styling to this document, you can add a style tag, and most likely you add it to the head because it's information that you want to send to the browser. Okay, you instruct the browser about the styling. So you add a style tag, lowercase. It's fine with uppercase, but the convention to use lowercase. Within the style tag, you can enter any CSS here. Any CSS will be valid. Even notice that if I put a comment, it's completely different than HTML comments. You see the syntax for a comment for HTML here. And to create a comment, you have to press Control / as a shortcut from Visual Studio Code. Notice the syntax here is different from this syntax because this is CSS comment. This is HTML comment. Okay, and they are completely different. Okay, so right here within the opening and the closing tag of the style tag, I can add any CSS code. So I can add a paragraph here, for example, and I say the CSS properties should, or property declaration. This consists of key value pairs, something like that, just any text. Right here, I need to select the element that I want to change its properties. In that case, I can select the paragraph, for example. So you can put here P, short for paragraph. In order to start adding declarations, you put opening and closing tag. So now I'm selecting that element, the paragraph, and I want to add some properties to it. The easiest property is going to be the color property. So I can add color, and you can add color using name of colors. So I can add blue, red, green, and by default, the browser understands, I think, up to 250, not 100%, or 125 named color. You can search it real quick. Let me close that. CSS named colors. And if you go over here, you have all the list of all the named colors. These are the names of the color. Number. List. You don't have a total number, but you'll get a list of all the colors, the names of the colors, and you can select any color. You can refer to a color with hexadecimal named color, and it's very simple. For example, this is the green, and Visual Studio Code make it very simple. Let's say I want to make it red. Okay, you have to terminate this declaration. This is the property name. This is the property value. They are separated by a colon, and they have to be terminated with a semicolon. Now, if you hover over this, you'll see Visual Studio Code give you the format in something called RGB, or red, green, and blue. That's what is RGB for. And technically, the red here have the 255 value. You can change that to hex. You can change it to HSL. There is multiple different formats for colors, but I can put it in hex, and I can use this tool to see the degree of the red that I want. Let's say I want to make it lighter red or darker red, and I can select any red that I want. And you also can control the transparency of the color. You can change the color here. So it's a very nice tool that comes with the editor. Okay, let's say I'm happy with that red. I'll keep it the red, but keep in mind that this is a hex value. Hex is a base of 16 numerical system that the computer use. And technically the first two characters for red, second two character, it's RGB, red, green, blue. So it have 0C for blue, 2C for green, and F8 for red. And for hex colors, you start with the hashtag. You can still use the named color, not a big deal. Just want to show you that tool that comes Visual Studio Code. Now, I change this paragraph to be red. In order to view that, I will open it with a live server. Notice that the text automatically get red. And if you right-click on this paragraph and open the dev tool, you will see our paragraph here. We are in this tab, which is the elements. And notice the styles here. You will see that this paragraph, color red, it's coming from index.html, line number 9. But also that you're going to find that this paragraph have some default properties like display, margin, and we're going to cover what is the properties. But where is this properties coming from? These are the default properties that your browser will give to any paragraph. Okay, and you can see that by saying user agent style sheet. User agent is referring to the browser. And you can play around. That means you can deselect this property. Notice that the color will be black again. You select it, going to be red, which is pretty cool. And you can change the code on the fly here dynamically. Let's say I want to change it to blue, press enter. Notice that the color turned to blue. Can make it green. Here, the color turned to be green. Very cool. Again, for the syntax, you make a selector. In that case, I'm selecting the paragraph, this paragraph, not the H1 and the paragraph, only the paragraph. You open the parentheses, so you can add multiple declaration between the opening tag and the closing tag of the curly brackets. You start listing all the properties that you want to change. I want to change the color. I want to change, for example, background color. You have another property called background color. Let's make it blue. And that blue, let's make it light blue. Yeah, hex format, like navy. There you go. Notice that we have this light blue and the red color. And if you inspect, you should see the two properties that we added, the color and the background color. And you can remove any one of them and add it to debug your code and test your code. Okay. Now, I want you to try to change the H1 color to green. And you can put the answer in Slack. Let me see if you're going to be able to do that, the Slack channel. What is the CSS? What is the selector for H1? Try to do it on your own. Or the heading level 1 here. I want it to be green. Okay.
I have some question.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so yes, the HTML, I tried to write these codes and then I tried to open in another page which you easily open, but I don't know how. I mean, I tried another white paper file where we can see what we did already. So I tried to do that and couldn't do. I'm very new.
Okay, no problem. No problem. That's again, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Okay, let me tell you about this. How about you share your screen? Now let's see what is the problem that because it's very important that you understand the basics and how to run your code. And so you can share your screen and by that I can fully understand what is the issue that you have.
Oh, okay. So I wrote these codes.
Oh,
You,
can you share your screen?
uh,
It's the green button at the bottom.
I just tried. I nothing more, but oh, can you see mine? Or
No.
what should I do?
The green button at the bottom. It says share screen at the bottom of the Zoom. You click in that green button, share screen, select the screen that you want to share.
Okay. Share screen.
Yeah, then select the screen that you
Yeah.
want to share.
Yeah. For example, I wrote this one like you showed.
I can't see your screen, sorry.
You can.
Did you share your screen?
Yes, I did like green. And
Press Alt S
okay.
and the zoom.
Well, okay, I don't want to start also. I will try it later.
No, that's fine. You just try to click on the Zoom meeting.
But if
Press. Go ahead. If you want.
but then it will show me.
Right here, it starts start to share. Good.
Can you see?
I can see now. Yes.
I just tried. This is my very few. I tried to do something and then see. Am I doing something right? And then try to go back and see another white file where we see what we did.
Okay. So the very first thing that I want you to remove everything here.
Remove
Yep. So remove this text.
everything.
Everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Just highlight them and press backspace. No, just grab them and just remove. Press an exclamation or type an exclamation mark and press enter. Exclamation mark. Type an exclamation mark. Shift and 1. That's the exclamation mark. Yep. Press enter. That's give you the boilerplate of the HTML document. Now you can change the title text between the opening and closing of the title to rename the title of your document.
Okay. And then how I go to see what
you put all your code within the body. So if you want to create an H1, for example, you add it to the body. So you go to the body, type an H1.
Okay.
Just type an H1 and press enter. No. Control Z. To go back, Control Z. No. Can you type in Control Z?
Okay.
Control Z again.
Again?
Yep. Keep, because line number 5. Yep. Line number 5, you make a mistake. Control Z again.
Okay.
That's it. So you undo this. Click in line number 9.
Yeah.
Click in number 9. Line number 9. Type in H1.
Yeah.
To have a heading level 1.
Yeah.
Press enter.
Yeah.
Then type in anything you want, like hello HTML. Now I want you to go right click on this page.
Right click in.
And right here, right click in the HTML.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't have the live server installed. I want you to go all the way to the left in the Visual Studio Code. All the way in the mouse, go to the left. You see the icons? You have icons. Yep, this one.
Yeah.
Click on it. Type in here, live server.
Okay.
With a V, live. Live. Live with a B.
Oh,
Live server. Yep, the first one, you click and install. That will give you an extension, the first one, very first one. Click on the install button. It's installing, good. You can close the extension, the top bar, the top X, right here. Yep, close here. Barry just mark it for you. Okay. Now go to the index.html. Click in the index.html file. Yep. Good. Right click now, since we added this extension. Right click. You'll see here, open with live server.
oh, okay.
Down. And that should open your page. Allow access.
Okay.
And here, you will find hello
Yeah,
screen.
okay. Thank you
Yep.
very much.
You're welcome. No problem.
I'm sorry, but I think.
No problem. No problem. Maybe.
Okay, I will do it.
Sure. You
Thank
can.
you.
Let me now share my screen back. Okay. So let's see who's in the chat was able. I see only Stephen did the color for the H1. So you can do H1 here. Open the curly brackets and the closing curly brackets. And we can do color green. And don't forget the semicolon at the end. And if I save that and I check my page here, which I need to open it live server again because I closed it, notice that the H1 here turned to be green. Good. So now you get introduced to the color and the background color properties, and also how to type in colors either in a hex format or in a named color format. Okay. So that's the basic syntax. Of course, the syntax can get a little bit complex with the selectors. Now let's talk about how you can use CSS. The way I'm going to use it here using the style tag, it's called internal CSS. And there's 3 ways that you can write your CSS or bind the CSS code with your HTML. There's 3 types. Here, this is called internal because it's inside the HTML document. We're going to go over the 3 ways that you can add CSS properties to your document. We have the inline CSS, internal CSS, which is the one that you use the style tag, and also you have the external CSS. Well, internal, it's good for demonstration, similar that I use it. I mean, sorry, this is inline. Inline is not the best, especially if you're building big applications, and I will show you why. Internal is good for demonstration. External probably is what you're going to use whenever you're writing a new application. You're going to use an external CSS. You want to separate your CSS from the HTML. That's why you're using an external style sheet. And also you have multiple styles and cascading order. So we're going to go over what does the cascading order means. Let's talk about the very basic implementation of CSS, which is the inline CSS. Inline means it's inline with the element. So an inline style may be used to apply unique style for a single element. To use inline style, add the style attribute. So it's going to use style not as a tag in the head, however, as an attribute to the relevant element. So the style here, this is an attribute. And as we covered yesterday, attributes just provide an extra information about your HTML element tag. And it's a key and value. So the key is the style equal. And you start putting here the value, which is the CSS code. And don't forget the double quotation or the single quotation. And right here, notice that we have a declaration, a CSS property declaration where you have the property name, colon, and then the value. The question, why we didn't use a selector here? Because you're already applying this CSS to this paragraph. You don't need a selector. You're already applying this CSS to that specific paragraph. You don't need to select it. You put it in line to the paragraph. Okay, so let's try inline styling and see what is the disadvantage. So I can comment all of that. And if I comment that, just highlight everything and press Control / that will add a comment. So it will not going to be taking effect. And if I open my server, notice none of the styles changed. And I can go to this paragraph. I add a style equal. And automatically the Visual Studio Code will list all the CSS properties that I can use. I'm interested to have the color to add the same properties that I have over here. Color, let's say red. And I can put colon, background color. I will make it, for example, navy. Okay, so I'm adding two declarations here. I'm putting them in line to the paragraph. Okay, where I'm adding the style attribute. And if I save that, that should work. If I open now, this is how it looked like. And if I inspect, you will notice that you have the properties, but also notice that these two properties coming from the element.style that indicate that they are inline styles. Okay, and you can clearly see them here in the code, the element when you hover over it. Okay, why probably this is not the best practice? Let's say I have another paragraph. That means for every single paragraph, if I want all the paragraphs to have the same styles, I have to copy and paste the same styles for every single paragraph. And this is a lot of repetitive code in that case, right? So for the second paragraph, you have also the background as navy, the color as red, which is repetitive code. And that case, inline is not the best. Plus, also imagine that this paragraph, I have a lot of properties. That mean I have to keep adding them here. Let's say I want the text align to be center. And I want to add, for example, another one. Let's say that text align will center the text. Let's say font size. We're going to go over font size in text align later on. Let's say we're adding a font size to be 20 pixels. We'll make the little bit bigger. So that's a lot of CSS declaration. And I keep mixing the CSS code with the HTML code, which is not the best practice to keep merging the two languages together. You probably want to separate them. And also the other disadvantage that you have to copy every time you want to repeat the same properties to a different element, you have to keep copying them and add them to the second element. Okay, notice that here, they are text aligned to the center, and you have the properties right here, or the declaration are right here. Okay, so that's called, let me add here, H2 CSS, or inline CSS. I'm gonna have horizontal ruler. close one of them. So that's the inline CSS. That's how you can add the CSS as attribute by using the style attribute. Second type is what we use, which is the internal CSS. An internal style sheet be used if only a single HTML page has a unique style. The internal style is defined inside a style element inside the head section. So you have to create a style element that inside the head section, and then within the style, you can enter all your CSS code right here. Okay. And as I said, it's okay for small applications, for demonstrations, but not for enterprise or big applications. So I can uncomment this. This is simply inline or internal, sorry, CSS. And for using internal CSS, I'm just going to copy this line here. I'm going to comment these 2 lines and remove the style sheet here. Okay. Now, I'm selecting all the paragraphs. Since I have only 2 paragraphs, they're going to be selected. The H1 will be selected here. The H1 will have a green color. The paragraphs will have a red color and a background of that color, which let's make it navy. Notice as an advantage here, first, you're not mixing the HTML with CSS. That's 1. 2, you don't have to repeat yourself here for the paragraph, even though you have 2 paragraphs, both of them will be selected. Okay. Not like this example when we did the inline that we have to copy the same style tag over and over for every single paragraph. Here, you have to write it once. You're selecting paragraphs that mean all the paragraphs that's inside your document. If you save that, there you go. I can make an H2 here. Say internal CSS. Now this is the internal CSS. And I can add more here, for example, like text align, center. If I save that, notice that they are centered. That's pretty much similar to the CSS that we added here. The only difference that you should have a selector because the CSS code is separated from the HTML document. So you have to select the element first from the HTML document that you will apply the styles to. Also, this will live inside the style tag within the head. Okay. The last type is the external CSS. For an external CSS, that you have a completely external sheet that you can use. With an external style sheet, you can change the look of an entire website by changing just one file. In that case, you can create style.css, you can create main.css, you can name the file anything you want. Each HTML page must include a reference to that external style sheet. It has to read the style sheet and apply all the styles to the document. To link the HTML document with the style sheet within the head, because it's an instructions that you have to give to the browser, use something called the link tag. And the link tag here will link your styling sheet with the HTML sheet. It's very important to pass the relation attribute that you say that I'm linking a style sheet and it's href. Href in that case indicate where you can find it, style.css. Okay, let's do it. I want to create here style style.css. And I can copy all the styles here that I have in the style tag, can copy them and paste them right here. So now I separated the CSS code from the HTML code, and I can comment that. I don't need it. Okay, I can have here external CSS and add a horizontal ruler. Okay, so if I try to open that, you'll notice that the style sheet is not applied to this document because I didn't link it. I have to link it first. To link a style sheet, you have to use the link tag. So you can type in link and a self-closing tag. You don't need a close tag here because it don't have any content. And it's very important to have two attributes. The first one is the relation. And here you put style sheet. And the second one, the href, where you specify which file that you want to link to this document as a style sheet. That case is called style.css. So you can enter it as a style.css. However, personally, I prefer to enter that will work. It's not, as you can see here, it's working. It will apply it right away. But I prefer to add the relative path. We're using ./ that I'm saying in the same directory. Dot means /, that means in the same directory, you're going to find this file here. Okay, and if you inspect any of the elements, notice that these styles are coming from the style.css. Okay, so these applied styles coming from the style.css. Also, if you go to the network and try to refresh, notice that the HTML, the document, will load to the memory the style.css. So it will make a request to load the CSS. You have some other stuff that the browser will load, but that's based on the extensions. You don't have to worry about it. Our code here is the index.html and the style sheet. The style sheet is separate from the HTML. You link them together by using the link tag that inside the head. Notice if you didn't specify the relation file, that you make the browser confused. What is this file, the style.css, to my document? It's going to be confused, and I can show you that it's not going to work if you didn't pass the relation attribute. So it's very important to have the href where you specify the external style sheet. Here you put only CSS. And not only that, you have to also add the relation. And the order doesn't matter here. You can put the href before the relation. That's fine. And I specify that it's going to be the style sheet for this document. If I save that, notice it will read this file and will apply. Now, in that case, I can open it side by side by clicking this button. I'm selecting all the paragraphs, which I have 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. All of them, they will have a red color, background navy, and they're all centered. And all the H1s in my document will have color green in that case. And that's the external. So you can apply 3 different types. Or you can include CSS with 3 different implementation of CSS, either inline CSS or internal CSS or an external CSS. External, that's what we're going to be using by the end of this bootcamp. We're going to have to do a project. I'm going to probably using the external one because it's the cleanest one. You separate, you only focus on CSS right here. Here, you only focus on the HTML code. It's called separation of concerns. And this is very important concept when you do development, that you want to separate the HTML code from the CSS code, from the JavaScript code. So you're not going to have like a spaghetti code, everything mixed together. Okay. Any questions so far before we go to our very first break? 10 minutes. Anything that we covered so far you don't understand?
Sorry, mine's not working.
Okay, share your screen. No problem.
I'll try and share my screen.
Hope that I can actually think. Probably starting from next session, I'll do like I can control your screens.
Oh, I have to hit share. There it is. Okay.
Mhm.
Can you see my screen?
I see your screen, yes.
Yep.
Mhm.
So I have the style.css on the left here, and
I
then
can tell you what is the problem right now.
oh,
If you take a look at the style.css tab at the top, you will have a white circle that indicates you didn't save that file. So just press Control
Oh.
S. Control S.
very. I
And
feel
now,
really silly now.
no,
Yep,
it's
there
okay.
it is.
It's happened. Trust
Now
me,
it works.
it's happened to me all the time. You'll find me do this mistake always.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. No problem. Any other questions before we go break? Okay, let me add a counter here. Google timer. Okay, so I'll see you in 2 minutes. Okay, guys, so let's continue. And let me start by asking you a question. With the current selectors that we have, regardless if using inline, I'm sorry, using internal or external. So right now I'm using external and I'm selecting all the paragraphs. And all of them, they have a navy background, red color, and they are aligned to the text. What if I want to apply this only to the second paragraph here? What should I do? That's something we covered yesterday with the HTML. If I want to only apply to this second paragraph, any ideas? Not all of them, because currently I'm selecting all the paragraphs. You remember we covered the IDs yesterday. So I'm selecting only a single element. I can give it a unique ID, and that will help me in selecting that element. So for example, I can give it an ID, paragraph, or para, short for paragraph. Good. So right here, and instead of selecting all the paragraphs, I can apply ID para. So I'm selecting any element, even if you hover over it, that means any element with the ID para. Doesn't have to be a paragraph, could be any element. To be more specific, you can say, I wanted a paragraph that have an ID para. So you put the P, the element. So you're saying that I want the paragraph element that has an ID. The ID is the hash, then the ID value, which is para. And if you save that, you get back right here, you'll notice only this paragraph will be selected. Now you're expecting the second question is, what if I want this and this, both of them to be styled? Now I can use classes, right? So I can add here a class, para, or let me call it red. So the class name is red to turn the text red. And I can also add a class here, red. And I get back here and I want any element. So if I put dot red to have the color red. And I can be more specific. I want a paragraph that have a class red. If I do it this way, paragraph with a class red, notice that the text is red here, the text is red here. And if I try to add class red here, do you think that the H1 will be red also or not, based on that? Yes or no? Let me put it side by side. So I added the class red to the H1. And I have this selection here. Do you think the H1 will turn red or? Of course not, because here you're saying, I want only a paragraph that have the class red, not a heading level 1 with the class red. So if you see that, notice that this is still green. It's not red anymore. However, if I remove the paragraph here, now it's red. So this is more general, that any element that have that class, in that case, it's at heading level 1, regardless, it's a paragraph, regardless, it's heading level 1, as long as it's have that red class, will have the color red. Okay, you can be more specific or filter them that I want the element to be a paragraph that have the class red. You can add multiple classes, but you have to separate them by space. So I can add here, for example, another class, can call it PG, short for background blue. Okay, and here, PG blue. I'm going to remove the para for now. So I have two classes. The first one is red. that will make the paragraph red. And I can add here any element that have PG blue class to have a background color of blue. So these two elements share the same class, both classes. And now notice that they have blue. I can remove the red here. And you will notice that only the blue background, but the text is not red anymore because only this paragraph have the red class. So you can use classes and IDs in your CSS, especially if you want to style multiple elements in the same time. We're going to get more about the selection of CSS later on, but that's something to keep in mind, that when you select an ID, you have to put the hashtag. You can be more specific, filter the element that have a specific ID, or you can be general, that any element that have that class or have that specific ID. Okay. Now let's talk about the cascading feature of CSS. So you can apply multiple styles in cascading order. It's very important to understand this rule or the order here. It will always apply inline styling first. That's have the highest priority. Okay. Second is the internal style sheet. So let me mark it down for you. So inline is always first. Then the internal style sheet is in second. External is the third. And the browser is the fourth. Browser default styles. So that's the order. If you have inline style sheet, it will override any of these. If you have an internal style sheet, will override the external and the browser default. If you have an external style sheet, it will override the browser default. If you don't have any style sheets, by default, you will have some styles that provided by the browser. And inline style has the highest priority, and it will override the external and the internal style sheet and the browser default. That's the reason they call it cascading. Okay. So based on whatever we covered here, let me create a new document. Kate.html, a very simple document. Let's have a paragraph. This is a very simple paragraph. Let's add an internal style tag, which is going to be in the head. And I'm going to say that I want to select the paragraph. I'm going to make the color red. So I should expect that the color to be red. Perfect, no problems. But what if I use the inline as well? So I can add the style attribute and also add the color to be green. Which one will take an effect? Going to be red or is going to be green? What do you think? Anybody take a guess? Green or red? The priority inline style always will override anything. Since this is the inline styling, it is green, it will override the internal styling. Now it's green. And if you inspect, you can actually troubleshoot what happened. Notice that the element.style is green. And you have also paragraph color red that's coming from cascade.html. That's coming from the HTML document line 8. But you'll notice that it's scratch off. They have a like line through it. That's mean the browser cancel it. If I remove the inline, then the cascade will take an effect. I mean, the internal one will take an effect. But if I add it, it will cancel this one because you're targeting the same element in that case. Okay. Well, if I link the style sheet here, link, you can link a style sheet. So I can reuse that style sheet for multiple HTMLs. And I do the relation to be style sheet. And I will do here the href will be the style.css. And I will comment that, and I add a paragraph here that all the paragraphs, the color will be blue. And this is an external style sheet. What do you think? It's going to be a blue or red or green? Is going to apply the one from outside or the internal styling or the inline styling? Let's take a look. It is still green. Why? Because the inline have the highest priority, and this is the inline. Now, what if I remove the inline? Which one in that case will take an effect? Is it the internal, so it's going to be red paragraph, or the external, so it's going to be a blue paragraph? Good. It's going to be red because the internal, it is in the same document. As long as you don't have any inline style, it will apply the internal, which is going to be red. Here we go. And if you inspect that, you'll notice that the blue coming from the style.css, which is the external file, and it's not applied. However, the color red applied. Perfect. And of course, if you don't have any of them, the default here that this paragraph, which is the user agent, it will be black color. That's the default color. Okay. Now let's go over something else. Let's say I only have the external style sheet. Okay. And I'm going to add an ID paragraph. And I'm going to add a class red. So I'm adding a paragraph. Well, let's add the ID blue and red. I have an ID and I have a class. And what I want that the paragraph by default have a green color. And if it's have the ID, which the ID that I used right here, blue, have the color blue. I can put that the paragraph with the ID blue. And I have the paragraph with the class red. It will have the color red. Which one do you think will apply? Is the green, the blue, or the red? Here I'm selecting all the paragraph, and this is still paragraph. Color it as green. Here I'm selecting a paragraph that have the ID blue, which is apply here to be blue. And finally, I have a paragraph with a class red, which is also still applicable here, and it's red. I have Steven saying red. Let's take a look. If I need to save the style sheet. And need to open it with the live server. And it's blue. How is that possible? Don't make sense at all. Because the blue here, you override that by the red. How is that possible? We get blue. You need to understand that if you have an element and an ID and a class, the element will always have the highest, the one with the ID that have the highest specification you specify, because this is about how you describe the element specifically. It's called specificity. You know that the ID can be only applied to one element of the document. So this is more descriptive, more specific toward that document. This is more general, any paragraph, I don't care. Classes can apply to multiple elements, but ID can only apply to one element. So this is very specific. That's why the priority goes with the IDs. So go for the ID, then the class, then just regular element. Okay, let me show you a trick. What if I here target any element that have the ID blue? That will change the case. It's still applying. That will make it blue. It's the more specific you describe the element. For example, I can here important. So I can add here that the element that have red and important, the more you describe the element correctly in the CSS, the more it should pick it up. Let's see. Oh, because I didn't save that. Still, the ID have the highest priority in that case. So IDs always overwrite anything. So let's cancel that. And now I added the important. If I added paragraph dot important to be color blue, which one do you think it will take an effect? This one or this one? Both have the same class, but this I'm adding two classes, the red and the important. It should be the red because you've been more specific in that case, right? The order doesn't matter here, so I can put it right here, as long as you're more specific right here. So it's gonna be red. Because you're describing the element very specific, that the element is a paragraph that have two classes, red and the important class. Good. If they are on the same level, you can override it. For example, if I comment this, the paragraph is green. Now I can add paragraph again, color blue. Now I can add paragraph, color red. First, I set it to green, then I set it to blue, then I set it to red. So the latest one will take an effect. It will override the previous two. So it will be red, right here, red. Okay. So with the type of the CSS implementation, inline have the highest priority, then the internal, finally the external. And of course, the last one is going to be the browser default. When it comes selectors, the ID have the highest priority, regardless of the order, because IDs can be only one element in your document that's very specific to select that element. Then comes the classes, then comes just element without either the ID or the class. Any questions, or probably to make sense to you about the priority or the order of the cascading? Okay, next we're going to go over Jan, that's a good question. Dark mode in a web browser, it's very simple. You can use a class or ID regardless, okay? But you have to add the class and remove the class. For example, the text, you want to make it white in a dark mode, in the background black. So you want to apply these classes to the element or your document only if the dark mode is applied. So again, think about it this way. You have a button, right? Let's call it dark mode. You have some text. This is text in your document that initially it's not in the dark mode. They have, let's say, black color and white background. And this is black color and white ground. Probably I'm going to have a class, call it light. That's me in the light mode. User clicking this button using JavaScript, because JavaScript is going to make it dynamic. JavaScript behind the scene will remove that class from your document, and it will add a new class, which is called dark. And the dark class will, instead of having black color, it will have white color, and it will have black background. So it's dynamically, you remove classes and assigning classes by using JavaScript. Hadia, go ahead. You have a question? But it's based on interaction from the user that he clicked the button. It's JavaScript is event-driven programming language. So the user have to create an event by clicking a button that will switch to the dark mode. Hadia, you have a question?
No.
Okay. Jan, is that answer your question? Is it clear how you change the dark mode and light mode? Of course, that will need a JavaScript implementation to dynamically remove classes and adding classes by the help with the JavaScript. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. So now, but up to this point, we're just learning about the colors, adding a color, changing the background color. There's a lot of properties that's related to CSS, and we're gonna go try to cover most of them. So getting in CSS, we're gonna talk about the selectors, which we briefly talked about, like the IDs, classes and regular element. And also we're gonna talk about comments. Comments is very important to organize your code, adding comments for yourself, notes for yourself, especially if you have a big CSS, you want to probably add some comment. This is the styling for the navigation bar. This is the styling for the footer. This is for yourself to break it down or categorize the styles that you might have for your web page. CSS selectors, you have your document. It's an HTML element. You select that HTML element to apply some rules to it. We're familiar with the element selector, where you can select H2, for example. That means we'll select all the heading will level 2 in your document. And in that case, if you have multiple H2, it will select all of them, and it will make the color to be blue. The ID selector, we also familiar with, that the ID selector that we want an element here, we don't specify what element, any element in my document that have the ID content, and it have to be only one element in the whole document that should have the ID content. And that's very specific. You're selecting a specific element, not multiple of elements. And you want to turn the color of that element or the text color of that element to be blue. CSS selector, it's a period, using the period here and followed by the class name. You might have multiple elements that belong to the same class. And in that case, you can change their color to blue. You have also something called the universal selector that we're going to cover. Universal selector, it's an asterisk. It's a wildcard. Wildcard means that I want to select all the elements in the document, including the head, the body, the HTML elements, any element in my document. I want to select it. H2, paragraph, everything. Everything will be selected. That's why it's called the universal selector. And there is a special purpose for that, and we're going to go over it in a little bit after we cover the margin and padding specifically. The element selector, we already used that. An element selector uses the element name to select the HTML element. A markup language defines the structure of presentation of a raw text. Here you have a very simple HTML code. You have the body, you add the H1. This is an element selector. So all I need is the name of the tag in that case, the H1. That's going to be my selector. And by selecting H1, if I have multiple heading level 1, they will all be selected. And in that case, you change their size and you change their color. Notice that the size here have a property called font size, and you separate them by dash. So the syntax for CSS that when you have a word with, or you have a property with 2 words, they usually separated by a dash, like background dash color. If the property have 2 words, they are separated by dash, not a space. It's have to be dash. So font size, so it's the size of the font. And the browser default for all the paragraphs is 16 pixels. Okay, that's the default coming from the browser. You don't have to remember that. You can always check that by the browser. The universal selector select all HTML elements on the page, regardless what it is. And let's go over that. Margin and padding, even though we're going to cover them in a little bit. Let's do reset. I'm going to call it reset.html. CSS selector. Let's add an H1. This is a title, or we call it my web page. Let's add an H2. Welcome to our website. Well, let's add a paragraph, 3 elements. And let's see the default behavior of our browser. This is a paragraph. Good. I didn't apply any CSS at all, so I will be using the browser or the user agent style sheet. If I open it, I want you to notice a couple of things here. That there is a spacing underneath this H1 and H2, and also for the paragraph. And they have specific font size, and font is bold. Now, if you right click and you inspect, and you go to the elements and you hover over the H1, you will notice that the H1 have a couple of properties that provided by the user agent style sheet, which is the default style sheet. Display block, the font size here, they're using something called EMs. So an EM is a multiplier of the parent element size. So since this H1 is within the body by default have a 16 pixel. So when I do 2 EM, the H1 is inside the body. So you multiply the 2 by the 16, you will end up having 32. And I can verify that to you that the size of this is 32 pixel because here, these are the styles, but you can go to the computed value and it will convert this 2 EMs to pixels. So if you go to the font size, you will notice it's 32 pixels. Why is 32 pixels? Because the default size at the body level is 16 pixel. And now by default, the browser will give your font size to this H1 to be 2 EM. So you multiply 2 of EM, that means like the parent element size, you multiply. It's a relative size. 2 multiplied by 16, the computed value is going to be 32. Font weight is a property to make the font bold or the text bold. And it's a relative value, can go from 100, that's mean light, not bold, all the way to 900. 900, that means very bold. So 700 here is very close to 900. So that's the reason you see the H1 look like a bold text. Okay, you'll see some margins here. Margin is the space surrounding the text. And if you take a look at the style, they have margin at the beginning, start, the end. So in the start here, the end, inline start, and so on. And you can see the margin right here. Notice that the top, it has space of 21.44 pixels at the top, and it have 21.44 pixels at the bottom. Okay, that's a default by the browser. That's for the H1. Let's take a look at the H2. So I highlight the H2 or click on it. Notice that the font size 1.5 EM. So it's 1.5 times 16. I can do that with my calculator here. 1.5 times 16, that's going to give me 24 pixels. And if I go to the computed value to convert it to pixels, it's 24 pixels. Perfect. Notice that it have a margin at the top, which is that space. Even when I hover over it, you'll see it in the page, the orange, 19.92, 19.92. And its relative value to the font size. For paragraph, also, you have some margin at the top, 16 and 16. So what is the problem by the default style sheets? The problem is they are not the same across different browsers. So these styles here that by default provided by Chrome, Internet Explorer probably gonna give different margins to your web page. Firefox probably give different sizing and font size for your H1. So you want to unify your application across different browsers. So what you want to do initially when you start any application or start building any web page, that you want to reset all the default margin and spacing that you might have here. You want to remove all the spaces because you want to have a control as a developer or a designer to add these spaces by yourself. You can add the margin by yourself. So I can add here style, and I want to set the margin to 0 pixel, that I'm going to remove it. But which element should I select? Should I select all the elements like H1, H2, H3, H4, and so on, paragraph, and keep selecting any element that might have in my page? That's a little bit annoying. You can use the universal element or this universal selector. That means the universal here saying that I want any element, regardless, it could be the body, it could be the head, it could be the HTML, any element in my document. I want to remove the margin, which is the space that's surrounding that element. And I also want to remove the padding, which is the space that inside that element. But yeah, I can apply any style to the body. I can add here, for example, the style tag, PG or background color, red. That means the whole page will turn to red. Notice that the whole page turned red because I applied it. You can apply any style to the body. Okay. And notice now I removed all the spaces and I can control them. Okay. So if you now inspect that, you will notice that the margin is 0, the padding is 0. And if you go to the computed, all the margins are 0. Okay. If you go to the body here, you'll notice that by default, the browser or the user agent add a margin of 8 pixels to your body. So I override that by resetting the default behavior of the browser to make it unified across multiple browsers, regardless what is the vendor is. And I can control the margin. Okay. So that's the universal, and mainly you use it to reset the browser default. Select all the elements, remove the margins, and remove the padding as well. Any questions? Okay. The universal selector select all HTML elements on the page. You can remove any margins, any padding. Margins is the space that outside the element. Padding is the space that inside the element. So there's 2 types of space, and we're going to cover that with the box module. You can also set the font family of the whole page, like to be the Courier New. You can control the font by using a property called font family. And notice that the Visual Studio Code will list all the fonts that you can use that by default in your system. Courier New, notice that each font is a stack of font. It's not only a single font. So for example, I selected this font, Verdana. So it will put Verdana as the first option, comma. If it didn't find Verdana in the user system, it will start to look for the Geneva font as a backup or as a fallback. If it didn't find Geneva, it will fall back into Homa font. These are 3 types of fonts. And if it didn't find any of that, it will fall into a generic, which is sans serif. This is a category of font that it will try to find any font at the user system that belong to that category, which is sans serif. So if I open it, notice that the font change, and sans serif, that means it don't have any fancy serifs. So I can change that, show you an example of like Times New Roman is a serif font. You will have like the Y here. Notice the M have the dash top and bottom. These are called serif. And honestly, as a developer, you don't want to use the serif fonts, especially if you have an article, because it's harder. It's very heavy for the user eye. From a user perspective, you want to use sans serif fonts. You can use serif, but for titles, but not for articles. If the user gonna read a long text, that will not the best for his eyes. So you probably want to use something that has sans serif. But this is a stack of font, 1, 2, 3 fonts, and at the end you always put a generic font type that multiple fonts can belong to it. Here you go. This is much easier to read. You don't have this extra serifs added to the font. And later on, probably today or the next class, we're gonna talk about font families, how you can add external fonts. We're gonna talk about Google fonts, how you can use them in your code as well. But this is for the universal selector. ID selector. The ID selector using the ID attribute to select the element in the HTML file. The ID of an element must be unique in the page. I mean, you can add the same ID multiple times, but it's semantically wrong. The ID, if you're going to add it multiple times, you should use a class in that case. It defies the purpose of using an ID. A hash character is used to select the element with the specific ID. Notice we have a paragraph here that have an ID content. If I want to select only this paragraph, regardless of how many paragraphs I have in my page, then I can use the hashtag content. And if I want to be more specific, that I want the paragraph that has the ID content, because currently what I'm describing here, I want any element in my document that have the hashtag content. It could be an H1, it could be an H2, it could be anything, as long as it have the ID. But I can be more specific by adding a P in front of the hashtag here. Next, we're going to talk about the CSS selectors. Same. The class selector uses class attribute to select all the elements that belong to that class in the HTML file. A period character is used to select element with the specific class. So I can use, here we have a paragraph that have a class main. I might have other elements that have the same main class. To select all of them, I can specify in the CSS that I want any element, doesn't have to be paragraph, that have the class main. And you set the background color, set it to green. Next, we're going to talk about the comments. Again, comments, it's very important, especially if you're working with a team, and also if your CSS code getting bigger and bigger. Imagine you have hundreds and hundreds of lines of CSS, you'll be lost. You want to at some point adding comments, and to add a comments is very simple. You press Control// and it will give you the syntax. It's simply / and asterisk. Then you can add any comment here. So I can say navigation, styles, close the comment, because if you didn't close the comment, it will consider all of the CSS here belong to the comment, because this is a multi-line comment. So I can go here and add like the date that I started developing this code or the CSS, let's say 2/13/2024, like author John Doe. So this is a multi-line comment. You can use a single line comment, I believe. Nope. So it's / and asterisk. Yep. This is the only syntax. The browser don't display the comments. It's only for you. It's notes for you. But with comments, we can place warning, description, and other notes. Comments are also important for debugging. If the code is not working as you're expected, you can shut down pieces of your code by commenting them and see if they are the one that generating the errors or not. We can use comments for searching for errors, for example. CSS comments can add the text. You add a comment between the / and the asterisk, then you add your comment, then asterisk, and then /. So this line is the comment here. This is the comment. Any questions before we move to the borders? How you can add border to any of the elements. Okay. Let me create a folder here, borders. I'll have an index.html, and I'll have an external style sheet, CSS. Create a boilerplate, CSS border. Have an h1, CSS border. Link the style sheet that exists in the same folder. So I can type in link, press enter. It automatically will put the relation style sheet, and I can find the CSS that's right here. Okay, so if you run it, there is no styling at all, just CSS border. And now let's see how we can add border to any HTML element. Because there's multiple properties that's related to border. You have the border color, you have the border thickness, the width of the border, and the type of the border, because there's different types of border. You want it a solid border, you want a dash border, you want a dotted border. So we're gonna go over the border properties in general, the border style, and the border width. Border properties. You can have a solid border. You can have double line border, dashed. You can have a border only in one side. You can have it on top on the bottom. You can't remove the border at all from any element. Let's talk about the border style. This is the very first property. So I'm going to have here h2 border style. Going to have a paragraph here. Going to say let me select paragraph border style because I don't remember them. I'll let the Visual Studio Code help me, and notice that it will list all the types of border that you can use. So we have the dashed. So I'm going to add here class style border style. So I can add the border style to be dashed. So I can have the paragraph with the style class. And let's try it. Put it with the live server. Notice automatically you'll have the dashed border. You can override it here by border. Select different border. We saw the dash. We can have it dotted. So the dotted here will override the previous rule. Okay. So now it's dots. Can add border style to be double, which is going to be a double line. Notice that we have the double line. Can change it to groove. Groove is considered to be 3D. Probably not going to see it because we have to make it thicker. And to change the thickness of the border, we can select border width. Let's say I want it to be 10 pixels. Now you will see the C3D because here you have some shadows and this is lighter color. So this is called groove. You can select it as hidden. Inherit, that means it will be inherited from the parent. You can set it to outset, like it looks like it's coming to the screen. You can use inset, like it's pressed inside the screen. This is all 3D. You can use reg, also 3D. Can use solid. Solid is the most popular and the most one that you can use. Notice that we have a property called border width, and that will specify the thickness of the border. We have different type styles. Of course, you make it none. That means you remove it. Okay. So I will keep it solid, and I will do the border width be 5 pixels or 3 pixels. What about the color? You can use the property border color, and you can put any color. For example, I want the border to be red. Here, it's going to be red. So 3 main properties: the width, the style, and the color. That's specifically for the border. You can control which side of the border, because here you have the top, right, bottom, and you have the left. So for example, I can say that I want the border color. You can do border top color, green. Notice you have the top is green. You can have the border bottom to be blue. You have the border left to be yellow. Border left color. There you go. And we can have border right color to be red. Also, you can use this top, bottom, left, and right with the style and the width as well. So I can say that I want the border top width to be 1 pixel, or let's do 2 pixel. And I'm on the border bottom width to be 5 pixels. So it's going to be a little bit thicker. Want, instead of the bottom, I want the left to be 7 pixels. Now it's going to be thicker here, as you can see. And the right to be 10. Here we go. We have 10. You can do the same for the style. So instead of width, we're going to change the style. 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 And for the first style, I'm going to use the dashed, dotted, double, and solid. There you go. So the top one is dashed, the bottom is dotted. Here, this is doubled, and this is solid. Okay. So you always can add the top, bottom, left between any of the border properties. If you use just border width, that will apply to all 4 corners. If you want to be more specific about the left, so you have to use border left, then the property name, either color or width or style, and so on. Okay. Any questions so far before we take our second break? Of course, there's more about the border that I want to go over, but here we're just going over the 3 main properties that will affect the border. Questions? So let's take our break. So timer, let's take a 10-minute break. After we get back from the break, not a 1 hour, we're gonna continue with borders. I'll see you in a minute. Okay, guys, so we're gonna continue. Let's close the timer. So we stopped here at the border and we cover 3 types of border properties, either the width, the style, and the color. And we said that we can control, if we didn't specify top, bottom, left, or right, eventually it will control the whole 4 corners. But there is another way that you can type the border. For example, if I type border width, if you provide only one value, like 10 pixels, that will apply it to the whole corners. So if I save that, now all corners have 10 pixels width. So one value, that mean will apply to the top, left, right, and bottom. What if I apply 2 values and separated by space? Border width. Let's say apply 10 pixels and 5 pixels. When you apply 2 values, that's 2 values. The first value is going to be top and bottom. So the top and bottom will be 10 pixels. The second value will be left and the right value. So if I save that, notice that the left and right have 5 pixels. However, top and bottom have 10 pixels. Okay, so you can pass 2 values. Border width, you can pass 3 values. 3 values. And this is very general for multiple properties, not only the border. Later, when we apply margin, which is control the space around the element, the same behavior. If you apply 1 value, it will apply to the whole 4 corners, 2 values. So that concept is not only with the border, with multiple other properties. Also, the left, right, top, bottom, you can add them to other properties as well. 3 values here. Let's say I have 2 pixels, 5 pixels, in 10 pixels, or let's make it 1 pixel, 5 pixels, and 10 pixels. Okay. Notice this is, forget what is the 3 values are. Should have it here, slides. You can always search CSS border 3 values. Or easier way, you can virtually see it. If you make this 10 and you make this 20. So the 1 is only affecting the top. Yeah, that makes sense. And then the second value, well, 10 pixels is going to be the left and the right, left/right. And finally, you terminate it by the bottom, which is the third value. So the bottom will be 20 pixels. And you can actually inspect that. And you see that computed, you will notice that the left computed at the end here, it's going to be the colors, all this applied. Border width top is 1 pixel. Right width 10 pixels. The left is 10 pixels. And the bottom is 20 pixels. So this is the format. The first one is going to be for the top. The last one will going to be for the bottom. The middle one will be applied to the left and right. Finally, you can have 4 values, where the first one is top, then it's going to go like a clockwise. It's always clockwise. You start from the top, close it by mistake, top, then right, you go clock as you're turning to a clock, top, right, bottom, and left. Top, right, bottom, left. So I can add border widths with 4 values, 1 pixel, top, right is going to be, let's do 3 pixels, bottom, let's do 6 pixels, and the left, let's do 9 pixels. Okay, here you go. So it's going as a clockwise. And you can apply the 4 values or 3 values or 2 values with any of the properties like the style or the color as well. So for example, I can do color, border, color, red, green, blue, yellow. That means the top will be red, the right will be green, the bottom will be blue, and the left will be yellow. Let me save that. Here we go. Top green, red, green, blue, yellow. It's going with the clockwise. Okay. Well, sometimes there is a shorthand. So instead of using all of these properties, and might not gonna take because I have a couple of comments here. Okay, comment that. Comment that. You have a shorthand if you want to control the 3 properties. This shorthand is called border. But the problem, it will affect the 4 corners. And when you do border, you should first specify the widths. For example, if I wanted 5 pixels. Second is the style. Like for example, if I wanted solid. And finally, you can specify the color, let's say red. So now instead of keep typing border style solid, border widths 5, and border color red, you put them in one shorthand. The only thing that you can't apply it for specific corner, it will affect the whole 4 corners. So now I will have a thickness of 5 pixels, red, and type solid. This is the recommended order. However, the order doesn't matter here. So you should always start with the widths, then the style, and then the color. The first 2 is the required fields. The color is not required. So if I remove the color, it will be black. But if I didn't set it to solid, I don't have any border. So I need to set that style. And finally, the color like blue. And this is technically a shorthand because you just type in border. You can remove the border with the shorthand by setting the border to be none. And that's mean you're removing any border. And there are some elements by default that have a border. For example, there's a button element. Let's say click me. And if you want to style this button, you want to remove the border. By default, it's have a border. So I can select this button and say border to be none. Once I do that, notice that the border gets removed. Now I can control the background of the button, background color, let's say Dodger blue, and I can select the color of the button to be white. Here you go. So I completely styled the button to be that type of button here. So this is the shorthand where you specify the widths first, then the style, then the color. The CSS border properties allow you to specify the style of the border, where we have multiple styles, the widths, and the color of the element's border. However, if you're using the shorthand, that will affect the 4 corners of the border. The border widths, it's a property that defines the widths of the border. The border widths property can have from 1 value to 4 values. 1 value, it will affect the 4 corners. 2 values, the first one, top and bottom. Second value, left and right. 3 values. The first one is top, middle, left and right. Last one is bottom. If it's 4 values, it's going to start from the top, then the right, top, right, bottom, left, like a clockwise. So I have here 3 paragraphs, 3 different IDs. Part 1, part 2, part 3. I will select the part 1. Notice that I select that border style to be dotted and 7 pixel as the width, or the border width to be 7 pixels. That's what you will have here. The style here to be dashed. However, I put the widths to be 7, 10, 3, and 15 pixels. What is the pixels for the bottom here? The width of the bottom. Anybody can take a guess based on these values? We start from the top, 7 pixels, then 10 pixels, then 3 pixels, then we have here 15 pixels. That's correct, Jan. For box number 3, we have doubled. That's the style, the border style. And we have 7, we have 2 values, 7 pixels and 10 pixels. What is the pixel or the width right here from the right based on these 2 values? 10 pixels, that's correct. So the top will be 3 pixel. The bottom will be 3 pixel. Left and right, 7 pixel, not 3. This is 7. This is going to be the top and bottom, and the 10 is going to be left and right, 10 pixels. Perfect. There is a shorthand, as I told you. It's just border, that the style name or the property name. You apply the width, style, and color. The border property is shorthand property of the width, style, and the color. But it will affect the whole 4 corners. You can't use the shorthand for only the left side. I think you can do something like, border left if you want to use the shorthand for only the left side. So in that case, using border left, you can use border bottom, you can use border right. That's the shorthand for a specific corner. But if you just use border, that's for the 4 corners. Here for part 1, we set the border to be 5 pixels width, to be dotted as a style, and the color to be an orange. For the paragraph with an ID part 2, the width of the border will be 3 pixels, and the type is going to be grove, and the color is going to be an RGB value, which is 24, 17, 28. And when you use an RGB, technically any color can be derived from 3 main colors. That's the primary colors, red, green, and blue. You just mix these 3 colors together. For example, if you're mixing red, green, and blue, if you're mixing red and green, I'm not good with that type of mixing, but when you mix red and green, you get some other color. So that's the same concept here. RGB take from values from 0 all the way to 255. So the first value is the red, green, and blue. So 0, that's mean very dark red. It's going to be black. 255, that's the highest number. It's going to be like bright red, like turn to be white. And you can mix any value. Here you're mixing 24 of red, 148 green, 205 blue. And again, I don't remember them because you can easily derive them. There's tools in the Visual Studio Code. That means if I put here 25500, it will be complete red. If I put the 255 in the middle, it's going to be green color and the rest is zeros. It's very important to understand the box model because that's what you see right here. This is the box model, that any element in HTML is considered to be a box. And with that box, it have space outside that element. There is space, then the border. So you have the margin, which is the space outside the element. You have the border of the element, and between the content of the element and the border, there is some spacing called padding. Okay, and then you have the content. Any element in HTML should have this, is considered to be a box. Okay, that's what is a box model. All element in HTML file is considered as boxes. For example, this section here, it's a box. It will be composed of a margin, which is a space outside the border. Padding is a space that inside the border. And you have the border that you can control its width, and you have the content itself. Box model have margin, which is a transparent area around the border. So this space here, okay? The border itself, that around the padding and the content, the padding is the transparent area around the content, and you have the content, which is the content of an element. Okay. First, these three, or this 1, 2, 3 properties define the box model. Let's talk about the margin first. We talk about the borders and the properties that you can use with the border. Now let's talk about a margin. What is a margin? CSS margin is the spacing outside the border. So you can have margin at the top, bottom, left and right, or right and left. Margin are used to create a space around element outside of the defined border. Okay, so I have here 2 paragraphs. Then the first one, I set the background to be an orange. I give it a width. You can use the width and height properties. You do a margin bottom to that element of 10 pixels. That means outside that element, you have a spacing of 10 pixels. Okay, that will put some space between this box and this box because I'm using margin bottom. Margin by itself without the bottom will affect the 4 corners. You can specify margin bottom, margin top, margin left, and margin right, similar as we used in the border. There are 4 different properties for setting the margin for each side of the element. You can use margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. Similarly, you can use the shorthand margin. It's not actually a shorthand. If you're only providing 1 value, it will affect the space of the 4 corners. 2 values, the first one, top and bottom, second one, left and right. 3 values, the first one is going to be the top, second one is going to be the left and right, and the third one is going to be the bottom. 4 values, it's going to also will apply the clockwise rule, where you have the top, the first value, then the right, second value, bottom is the third value, and left is the 4th value. Shorthand property, when you have 4 values, this is margin in general. If you have 4 values, the top, right, bottom, and left, here, I have margin 30. That means I'm pushing that element down 30 pixel. I'll push it down by adding a space on top of it, 30 pixel. Then I have 10. So the space here is 10 pixels. then 8 at the bottom pixels. And I'm going to push it to the right by 25 pixels because I'm going to add 25 pixels of empty space here. Okay, these are 4 values right here. Okay. You can have 3 values where you combine the right and left together. Top, the middle one. The first one is going to be the top. The second one is going to be the right and left. And the last one is going to be the bottom. There you go. 30 is going to be the top pixels. 10 is going to be from here and here, both of them 10 pixels. And finally, you have the 25, which is the bottom, 25 pixels. Two values, top and bottom, right and left. Very simple. Now, my question to you, what is the space right here at the bottom value between the two boxes? Is it 3 or 25? 3, that's good. 3 is going to be top and bottom. 25 is going to be left and right. The two margin values are used. The order is top and bottom and right and left. Let's work with the margin before we get to the auto value. Let's take a couple examples. Margin. Index.html style.css. CSS margin. I'm going to have a div with an ID box 1. And I say box 1. I'm going to have box 2, box 3. And I'm going to link the style sheet, which is the style.css. If you open it with the live server, you have box 1, box 2, box 3. Good. Let me now open the style sheet and put it side by side. With ID box 1 and box 2, box 3, all of them, I want to set the width for all of them to be, let's say, 100 pixel. I want to set the height for all of them 100 pixel. If I save that, you set the width, you set the height. In order to see it, I will add a border for all of them solid 1 pixel or 2 pixels. Make it black, it's fine. Here we go. So by default, there is no spacing between them. Okay. Now for box number 1, I probably want to push it a little bit down. That means I need to add margin to the top. So I can use margin top. Let's push it down 25 pixels. See here, I added 25 pixels to the top. I can do margin to the right or to the left. Space here left. So push it, in that case, to the right of 25 pixels. There you go. I can do margin bottom. Let's do 80 pixels. So I'm adding a space here, 80 pixels. Good. And I'm just going to do the background color. Let's do azure I can do text align center. And I can apply to all of them, text align center. And text align can take center, end, or right and left. So if I do it right, gonna push to the right, left, left, and center. That's the three main values you're probably gonna use. Now for box 2, I will, if you added some margin to the right, you're probably not gonna see it because you already have some space here. So I can add margin to the right, let's say 30 pixels. You're not visually gonna see anything, but you added here some 30 pixels to the right. Since I'm using top, left, and bottom, I can write it with the shorthand margin, top 25 pixels. Right, I didn't add anything to the right, so I added 0. Then the bottom, 80 pixels, and the left, 25 pixels. If I save, nothing changed because this will override this 3, but with the same values. So if I comment this, it's pretty much the same thing. Now, there is a very important concept I want you to understand. That when I added the margin to the bottom here, I added 80 pixels. Okay. Now for box 2, I can add margin top of 20 pixels. What do you think is going to happen when I save? I'm going to add another additional 20 pixel here, so the total will be 100 pixel in total. Makes sense, right? Because I added 80 to the bottom of box 1, 20 to the top of box 2, right? So 80 and 20, that give me a total of 100 pixels. But this is not the case. This is not how margin work. Margin get collapsed together. When I have 80 and I have this one adding 20 pixels, they're gonna get collapsed together and you will have a total of only 80. Okay, think about it that the bigger one will take an effect. And I can prove that to you. Notice that there is no additional 20 been added because this is have to do with the margin collapse. When two margin met, they're gonna collapse with each other. So you need to keep that in mind. So can use margin left 50 pixels. I can do background color. Let's do page. Good. So I can do box 3. Since I don't have any margins here from box 2, and this should be box 3, I can add margin top, or I can just simply add a margin of 20 pixels that will affect the 4 corners. Here we go. And I can set the background color to be purpley. And if you inspect any of these elements, you can clearly, so this is box 2, you see that the top margin is 20. You have 50 margin deckeys to the left. You don't have any margin to the bottom. You didn't specify any margin. And you have 30 on the right. And if you hover over it, you will see that margin will always be the orange color. The border here is 2 pixels. Notice that the border, because I added border 2 pixels to all of them, top, bottom, left and right. I can select the box number 1. You'll see the margins at the bottom 80. And you see box number 2 here. It's also have margin to the top, but both of them are collapsing together. Okay. Now let's talk about the auto value. Margin auto it will center an element to the middle of the screen. How does that happen? Auto, that means it will calculate the space, the full space that after the element, and it will divide it to the left and the right. So the margin property can be set to auto. The browser will calculate the margin and horizontally center the element. Well, let's try that with our example here. That means, let's say box 1, I set the margin to auto, it will be centered. Now you can ask question, how can I use the auto and still push it 50 pixels from the top? How can I do that? Auto is going to center that element from the left and right. So I can use two values. So I can do 50 pixels, right? 50 pixels top and bottom, and auto from the left and right, because to center it vertically, or horizontally, I'm sorry, it's affecting the left and right, right? So now I added 50 top, 50 bottom. If you want only the top, so it's going to be 50 top, left and right, and in the bottom, I'm going to set it to 0 pixels. And now you move the margin at the bottom. So auto is a value. You can use it either 1 value, 2 value, 3 values, or 4 values. Okay, and it can be used for the left and right because it will calculate the space and distribute it from the left and right, even if you resize the page. So if I resize the page, it's always going to stay in the middle here, which is pretty cool, right? That it will always be centered in the middle of the screen horizontally. Padding, it is the space that's inside the element between the border and the content. Let me remove the width and height. Okay. Of course, it will look like this because it's going to take the full width because it's a block level element. But we're talking about the space between the content, this is the content, and the borders. I can display all of them. You can use the display property to do them inline. So they're going to be right next to each other. Okay, inline elements, they're right next to each other. And you can change the default behavior, how the element displayed by using the display, and I want it inline, or I want it block level elements. Okay, so I can set the widths, only the widths, to be fit content. These are values, minimum content and maximum content. I can set it to auto, or actually fit content. Here we go. And it's still applying the margin. Now I want to increase the space within the border. That's what is padding control. Okay, so with box 1, I can add padding of 10 pixels. This is for box number 1. So if I save, notice that I add 10 pixels between the content and the border. So it's inside the element. So you have 10 pixels top, left, bottom, and right. You can add padding here for box number 2 from top and bottom, 10 pixels, left and right, 20 pixels. Here we go, 10 and 10, 20 and 20, and you can double check that here. Notice that the padding is the green color here, is the content between, is the space between the content and the border. The padding top 10, 10, 20, and 20. Good. And they follow the same rules as margin. You can use padding top, padding left, padding right, and so on. So the padding property is used to define space between elements, border, content, and the border. So you have the content and you have the border. You can use padding top, right, bottom, and left from the 4 corners. If you just put one value, it will affect the 4 corners. There are 4 different properties for setting the padding for each side of elements. Top, right, bottom, and left. So there's quite properties a lot in CSS. Here we have one box that have a width and height that we adding a padding 30. That's mean the top 30. Then we're gonna go to the right 10 pixels, 5 pixels, and 4 pixels. This one have 0 padding because I didn't specify any padding right here. Shorthand property. If 4 padding values are used, the order is top, right, bottom, and left, of course. Top, right, bottom, and left. Here we have 30 in top, 10 pixels in the right, 5 in the bottom, and 4 in the left. If you have 3, then you same concept, same syntax. First one is going to be the top, then right, left, and finally the bottom. If you have 2 values, the first one is going to be top and bottom, then right and left. We have the box sizing. Okay, so let's go over box sizing because it's a little bit related. And then we're going to probably do a little bit small exercise. And tomorrow we can cover the font properties like font families and how to use Google Fonts. And also some other properties that we're probably going to use in the project. Actually, we're going to meet again Thursday. Tomorrow, we're not going to have a class. So let's go over border sizing. A border sizing, or box sizing, how you can size the box. The box sizing property, it's a property, allow us to include the padding in the border in an element as a total width and height. What's happening here? Let me create a new folder. Box sizing. Index with HTML. Style.css. Box sizing. I'm going to have a div here with an ID of box. And by the way, Visual Studio Code have a nice property called emit. So if you type in the hashtag box and you press enter, it will create a div with an ID box. Here we go. So you don't have to type that. Also similarly with a period box, that will create a div with the class box. Here we go. If you want to create a paragraph with the ID box, so you can put the P, then the ID, similar that you type it in the CSS, press enter. Again, this is feature in Visual Studio Code. There's also a couple other features. For example, like if you're creating a UL and you want to create a list item inside it, you can use the angle bracket and then the list item. That means the list item is going to be inside the UL, and you can multiply times 3 list items. If you press enter, it will display the 3 list items here. We're going to discuss this more probably in the next class, this emit feature, because it comes really helpful, especially if you're writing a very big project. But now let's focus on the box sizing. I'm going to create a div with an ID of box. I'm going to call it box here. And I will link my style sheet. I'm going to go to my style sheet, select that box, and I will set the width to be 100 pixel, height to be 100 pixel. And if I open with the live server, can't see nothing because I just set the width and height. I can add the border to see something. Border, 1 pixel solid red. Here you go. Now let's add a padding of 10 pixels from the 4 corners. My question is to you, I'm going to ask you a question now. What do you think is going to happen when I add a padding? So this is 100 pixel because I set the width to be 100 pixel. Is it going to increase the width to include another 10 pixels here and another 10 pixels here? So the total is going to be 120 pixels. Or it will deduct the 10 pixels from the whole 100 pixels. What do you think? So the width, the final width is going to be 100, but you're actually pushing the content to be in the middle to occupying only 80 pixels. Which case will the default behavior of the browser? Yeah, I wish this is the case, Joe, but this is not the case. Let me show you that. That's what we want to eventually have, because it will be less confusion for us when we do the calculation. Because when I say I want the total width to be 100, that's what I'm expecting. But after adding the padding, it's actually will increase the width of the element. That's the default behavior. So this is the width. Notice now that I'm going to save this, and I want you to see that the width will get increased. So the widths get increased. And if you inspect, the total widths start from the border. You have 1 pixel here, 1 pixel here, plus an additional 10 for the padding. And then you have the content. So the width is for the width of the content, not the padding. The padding will increase the width of the element. Now we're going to have technically total width 1 plus 10 plus 100 plus 10 plus 1. So we're going to have 122 pixels from here to here. Okay, so you need to be aware of that. But I don't want it to be behaved that way. I want it when I set 100 pixels, that's the full width. Well, you can do that, but you just have to override the default. And that's the box sizing property comes in. Okay. So the box sizing property allow us to include the padding and the border in the element total width. So you want to include the padding and the border and the height within the border width. So you will have here the margin, then you have the border, then the padding, and this is the content area. If you didn't use the box sizing, by default, the width is only for the content area. If you set the box sizing to be border box, this is the value. That's how you can override the default. An element, the padding and the border are already going to be included within the width and height. And that's what I want. By default, it will have the value content box, but I want it to be border box. Here's an example. You have the content width to be 200 pixel. Then content width is 200 pixel. You're adding 20 pixels padding top, bottom, left, and right. And if it's content box, the total width will be 2 paddings, one from the left, one from the right. Each is 20. So it's going to be 2 times 20, going to be a total of 240. The content itself is 200 pixel, but the full width is going to be 240. However, if you're using border box, the total width from the border is going to be 200 minus, you will subtract the padding from the total width because it's going to be included within the total width. And most likely you want to be working with the border box because it's less confusing for you. You set a width, you want that to include everything, the padding and the border as well. So how we can set the box sizing? The best place you do that in the resetting code. You remember when we set, you want to reset the browser default, you want to reset the margin to be 0, and padding for all the elements to be 0, and all the elements, I want the box sizing to be a border box. And that's it. You do it one time in the reset code right here. And now if I open this again, live server, notice now that the total here is 100 pixel, and I can prove that to you. You have 110 in padding, and notice that the content widths get decreased to be 78 by 78. So now 78 plus 20 plus 2, 78 plus 2, that will give you 80 plus 20. That's the total 100 pixel that we specified, and only because I set the box sizing to be border box. Okay, so we covered a lot of properties. Now let's put them in action. Let's add a button here and try to style this button nicely, because we're gonna use a lot of buttons, like click me. Let's do it side by side. So I have this button here. So I can do the button, select that button. I want to add a margin from all the 4 corners to be 20 pixels. There you go. So I push it from the top, left, and right. I can remove the border to do border. And instead of removing it, I can do navy as a color. And I want 2 pixels, solid. Okay. I want to add a padding, top and bottom, 10 pixels, 10 pixels, yeah. Left and right, 20 pixels. Good. I want to change the background color. Let's do Dodger blue. And I want the text, the color, to be white. By default, you'll find that text is small, and you can inspect to see what is the size for the button. If you go to the compute it, these are the default variables that comes with the button here by the browser. The compute it, and you can look for the font size. You see it's 13.33, which is less than the paragraph text. The paragraph is 16 pixels by default. So I probably want to override the default size, font size, to be 16 pixels to make the size of the text a little bit bigger. Okay, so we was able to style this button. You can add some extra stuff, like, for example, if you want to round the corners, you can use the property called border radius. And let's add a pixels that, for example, 10 pixels. That will add the curvature to the corners like this. If you increase that number, it will increase the curvature. 50 pixels. I like to use 5 pixels, like tiny corners. You can control separate corners. It will accept 1 value, 2 values, 3 values, and 4 values as well. So I can add here 5 pixel, 10 pixel, 20 pixel, 30 pixels. It's going to be something like that. So you start from here, the top left, then the top right, it's clockwise as well. Then you're going to be having the bottom right, then the bottom left. Here we have 30. Okay. Usually when you use it, you'll use it as a 5 pixel or just one value for the whole 4 corners. Okay. You probably want a pointer when you hover over this mouse. You want to change the mouse. You can do that by cursor. And cursor can take multiple values. For example, alias. So when I hover over it, you see now the mouse will change. You can have auto or cell. You can have a copy. So it will have like this plus to copy, but I want it to be a pointer. So when I hover over it, you will have this finger like a pointer. So it will indicate to the user that it's clickable. Okay, so that's how you can style a button by adding a margin, padding, probably changing the font size and the border radius. I'll stop right here and accept any questions if anybody have a question or if you want to go over any of the properties that we covered today. Anybody learn a new property today, or you guys know all these properties from previously? What is your favorite property that you feel like you're going to use it a lot? Okay, display. We didn't cover it that much, but yeah, definitely it's very helpful. Okay, guys, I hope that you find the material understandable and easy. If you do have any question related to anything that we covered today, feel free to post it in the Slack channel for the class, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. And our next class is going to be Thursday, where we're going to go over the fonts, how you can change the font text, like font size, font family, font style, and also how to use external fonts like Google Fonts. And we're probably going to have some time to go over probably floating, how you can float element left and right. And also, like, we're going to talk a little bit about layouts. Probably we're going to touch in the Flexbox as well. Okay. So I'll see you next class. Have a good night, everyone.